The crystalline spires of the selenary warship Eternal Dawn cut through space, like frozen lightning, its hull reflecting the light of distant stars. On the command deck, War Leader Nera stood motionless, her silvery skin catching the glow of tactical displays. Her species' characteristic bioluminescent markings pulsed with a steady blue rhythm, betraying none of the anxiety churning beneath her composed exterior. The humans were coming. After centuries of careful genetic cultivation, after countless generations of selective breeding to create the perfect warriors, the mighty Selenary Empire faced an unprecedented crisis. Their carefully engineered genetics were failing, each generation becoming weaker, less stable. The secret that only the highest echelons of Selenary leadership knew: their species was dying. War Leader, her second-in-command, Tress, approached with characteristic fluid grace. The human vessel approaches. They call it the Meridian. Naira's outer membrane rippled slightly, the Selenary equivalent of a nod. Her species had spent months studying human broadcasts, learning their languages, analyzing their biology. Such a young race, barely spacefaring by Selenary standards, yet they had achieved something that eluded the Empire's finest geneticists: stable, natural reproduction. The human ship came into view, smaller than the Eternal Dawn but elegant in its own way. Unlike the crystalline architecture of Selenary vessels, it bore smooth curves and metallic surfaces. Primitive, by their standards, yet something about it spoke of potential. "They're hailing us," Tress reported, her own markings flickering with subtle patterns of uncertainty. "Display," Naira commanded, straightening to her full height. The holofield materialized before her, revealing a human male with dark skin and eyes that reminded her of the deep space between stars. "Greetings, War Leader Naira. I am Dr. James Harrison, Chief Cynobiologist and Diplomatic Liaison for the United Earth Government." His voice carried confidence, but also genuine warmth. It was unsettling. "You enter Selenary space, human. State your purpose." Naira kept her tone neutral, though her translator would strip away much of her species' natural harmonic communication anyway. Harrison smiled, a gesture they had studied but still found strange. "We come seeking peaceful dialogue between our peoples. Our preliminary studies suggest significant potential for mutual benefit through scientific and cultural exchange." Naira's secondary eyes narrowed slightly. The humans couldn't know about the genetic crisis. Their surveillance had been perfect, their security absolute. Yet something in Harrison's expression suggested he knew more than he should. "Your species is young," she replied. "What could you offer the Empire?" "Perhaps we should discuss that in person," Harrison suggested. "Our preliminary scans of your biology suggest fascinating areas of potential compatibility." The word sent a shock through Naira's system. Behind her, Tress's markings flared with alarm. They couldn't know. It was impossible. "You will be permitted to dock," Naira decided, her mind racing. "A diplomatic party of no more than 5 may board." Harrison bowed slightly. "We look forward to meeting you, War Leader." As the transmission ended, Tress moved closer. "War Leader, the High Matron's orders were to observe only. This exceeds our mandate." "The High Matron is not here," Naira replied sharply. "And she does not see what I see in our genetic labs. Each generation, more stillbirths. Each generation, more failures. If these humans have something we can use." "They are inferior," Tress protested, but without conviction. They had all seen the reports, the declining birth rates, the failing genetic lines. "Are they?" Naira turned to her second. "They breed naturally, without genetic manipulation. Their population grows while ours dwindles. Perhaps it is time to reconsider what we think we know about superiority." The docking procedure took precisely 18 minutes, each moment heavy with historical weight. Naira stood in the reception chamber, flanked by her honor guard, as the human delegation emerged from the connection tube. Harrison led them, his dark eyes taking in the crystalline architecture with poorly concealed wonder. Behind him came 2 security officers and 2 more scientists, all moving with careful precision in the slightly higher gravity of the Selenary ship. "Welcome aboard the Eternal Dawn," Naira greeted them formally. "You may proceed to the diplomatic chamber for discussions." But as Harrison passed her, something extraordinary happened. Her bioluminescent markings, perfectly controlled through years of military discipline, suddenly flared bright purple, the color of reproductive readiness. Horrified, she forced them back to their normal blue, but not before Harrison's eyes widened in recognition. He knew, somehow, he knew what that color meant. The implications staggered her. If proximity to humans could trigger reproductive responses in selenary biology, the possibilities were either salvation or doom for her entire species. "War leader," Harrison said quietly as they walked, dropping back to speak privately. "I think we both know why we're really here. The question is, are you ready to discuss the real future of our species?" Naira felt the weight of centuries of selenary pride warring with the desperate need for survival. In that moment, she made a decision that would change the course of both their civilizations. "Proceed to the medical bay," she ordered, changing their destination. "It's time we spoke honestly about genetics." Behind them, the stars watched silently as 2 species took their first steps toward a future neither had imagined possible. The medical bay of the Eternal Dawn hummed with activity as Dr. Harrison studied the holographic displays floating before him. Each projection showed cascading chains of selenary genetic code, beautiful in their complexity yet clearly degrading with each generation. Beside him, Naira stood rigidly, her markings pulsing with barely contained anxiety. "Your species engineered itself for perfection," Harrison observed, his fingers tracing the spiral patterns of alien DNA. "But perfection, it seems, comes with a price." "We sought to become living weapons," Naira replied, her secondary eyes fixed on the display. "Each generation was enhanced for strength, speed, intelligence. We thought we could control evolution itself." Dr. Reena Patel, the human team's geneticist, stepped forward. Her dark eyes were wide with fascination as she compared the genetic samples. "But you couldn't account for the complexity of natural selection. Each enhancement created unexpected vulnerabilities. Our scientists estimate 3 more generations before total reproductive collapse." Naira's admission hung heavy in the air. The Empire's greatest secret and greatest shame. Harrison turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "Yet something happened when we met. Your markings changed color, a biological response that shouldn't be possible given your genetic modifications." Before Naira could respond, alarms blared throughout the medical bay. On the diagnostic screens, selenary genetic structures were shifting, responding to some unseen catalyst. Reena rushed to the controls, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. "This is unprecedented," she breathed. "The human pheromones in the room. They're triggering dormant sequences in your DNA. Sequences that should have been engineered out generations ago." Naira felt it then, a warmth spreading through her body, her markings threatening to shift to that betraying purple once more. "Impossible. Our reproductive systems are strictly controlled." "Not anymore," Harrison said softly. "Your ancestors didn't eliminate those genes. They just buried them. And somehow, human biology is waking them up." The medical bay doors slid open as Tress burst in, her markings flashing with urgent patterns. "War leader, we're receiving reports from throughout the ship. Warriors are experiencing changes. The High Matron demands answers." A holographic transmission materialized in the center of the room, revealing the ancient, stern face of High Matron Vess. Her crystalline skin had grown opaque with age, marking her as one of the last naturally born Selenari before the genetic modifications began. "War leader Naira," her voice carried centuries of authority. "Explain these disturbances." Naira stepped forward, forcing her markings to maintain their professional blue hue. "High Matron, we've made a discovery. The humans have triggered what was meant to stay buried," Vess finished, her tone sharp. Did you think we didn't know this might happen? Why do you think we avoided contact with their kind for so long? Harrison stepped into view of the transmission, ignoring the shocked gasps from the Selenari guards. You knew about this compatibility. We suspected, Vess admitted. Our long-range studies showed possibilities, but you understand nothing of what you're awakening. Our warriors were engineered to be perfect. These primitive biological urges were purged for a reason. With respect, High Matron, Rena interjected, your warriors weren't purged of anything. These genes were preserved, protected even, almost as if someone wanted them to be found again. Harrison finished, realization dawning in his eyes. This isn't an accident. Your ancestors left themselves a way back. Naira's markings flared with sudden understanding. The ancient texts, the legends of the first matrons, they'd always spoken of a key to salvation, hidden in the stars. Everyone had assumed it meant some lost technology, some secret weapon. The human genome, she whispered. It's not triggering random changes. It's activating a predetermined sequence, a path back to natural reproduction. Heresy. Vess spat. We are warriors, not breeders. This information cannot leave this room. The Empire would collapse if. Her transmission cut off abruptly as the ship's lighting shifted to emergency protocols. Tress rushed to a control panel, her markings pulsing with alarm. Multiple ships emerging from hyperspace, she reported. War Speaker Mira's battle fleet. They're charging weapons. Harrison moved closer to Naira, his presence sending another wave of biological responses through her system. They're here to stop this, aren't they? To keep the secret. No, Naira realized, watching the approaching warships. They're here because they already know. The changes aren't just happening here. They're happening everywhere Selenari and humans have made contact. War Speaker Mira leads the traditionalist faction. They'd rather destroy us all than let our species change. She turned to Harrison, her markings finally shifting openly to purple, no longer fighting the change. You need to leave now. Return to your ship. Come with us, he urged. Your people need to understand what's happening. This could save your species and destroy everything we've built, she countered, even as her body betrayed her, responding to his presence. Our entire society is built on the myth of engineered perfection. This truth, it changes everything. The first shots from Mira's fleet illuminated the void outside, painting the medical bay in flashes of devastating light. Naira made her decision. Tress, begin evacuation protocols. Get the human delegation to their ship. She turned to Harrison. When you're safe, transmit everything we've learned to every Selenari world. Let them decide for themselves, evolution or extinction. As alarms blared and warriors rushed to battle stations, Naira watched her ordered world begin to crumble. In its place, something new was being born, as unstoppable as the genetic changes flowing through her body. The real question was, would her species survive its own rebirth? 3 months after the battle at the Eternal Dawn, Naira stood in the secure medical facility on Europa, Earth's icy moon, watching her reflection in the sterilized glass. Her silvery skin had taken on an iridescent quality, and the once military precision of her bioluminescent patterns now flowed in gentle waves across her body. The changes were undeniable. She was carrying the first documented human Selenari hybrid. Your readings are remarkable, Dr. Reena Patel said, studying the complex medical displays. The fetus is perfectly stable, combining traits from both species in ways we never thought possible. Harrison stood nearby, trying to maintain his professional demeanor despite the profound personal stake he now had in these developments. The genetic integration is far more elegant than anything we could have engineered. It's as if our species were designed to be compatible. Naira finished, her hand resting on her slowly swelling midsection. The question is, by whom? Before anyone could respond, the facility's communications array lit up with urgent messages. On screen after screen, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The news they'd tried to contain had finally broken. Dozens of Selenari warriors had become pregnant after contact with humans. War Speaker Mira's forces are mobilizing. Tress reported from her security station. She had chosen to stay with Naira, representing a growing faction of Selenari, who saw hope in these changes rather than heresy. They're attacking any ships or colonies showing signs of the transformation. Harrison moved closer to the displays, his face grim. How many others are like you, Naira? How many warriors are changing? Thousands, she replied, her markings pulsing with a new color, a deep gold of maternal protection. The compatibility spread faster than anyone predicted. Even brief contact was enough to trigger the dormant genes. But that's not what truly terrifies Mira and her followers. The success rate, Rena breathed, understanding dawning in her eyes. Every pregnancy we've documented has been viable. No failures, no complications. After generations of genetic dead ends, we're witnessing forced evolution. Harrison finished. Or perhaps, guided evolution. These genetic sequences weren't just preserved by accident. Someone in your past knew this would happen. The medical bay's doors slid open as High Matron Vess herself entered, flanked by guards whose conflicted expressions revealed their own biological changes. The ancient leader had fled the traditionalist purges, seeking asylum with the human-aligned Selenari. The first matrons, Vess said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. The ones who began our genetic modifications. We thought they sought to create perfect warriors, but we never questioned why they left certain sequences untouched. Naira turned to face her former leader, her markings now openly displaying the maternal patterns that would have been considered a weakness mere months ago. They knew we would go too far, that we would engineer ourselves into extinction in our quest for perfection. So they left us a way back. Through humanity? Harrison asked, skepticism clear in his voice. How could they have known about us? Perhaps they didn't, Rena suggested, excitement building in her tone. Perhaps they simply encoded a genetic key that would respond to compatible DNA sequences. Humanity just happened to be the species that matched. A sudden pain caused Naira to gasp, her markings flaring bright. The medical monitors erupted with activity as Rena rushed to check the readings. The baby, Naira managed, fighting through the sensation. It's communicating. The room fell silent as patterns of light began to play across Naira's skin, patterns that didn't come from her. The hybrid child within her was already developing its own bioluminescent abilities, creating completely new sequences never seen in either species. Remarkable, Vess whispered, her own markings responding unconsciously to the display. It's not just combining our traits, it's evolving them into something new, something better. The facility shook as proximity alarms blared. On the security screens, War Speaker Mira's fleet dropped out of hyperspace, weapons charge. They followed me, Vess admitted, her ancient face lined with regret. They'll destroy this facility rather than let these changes spread. Naira straightened, one hand protectively over her child while the other reached for her weapon. No. They need to see. To understand. She turned to Harrison. Help me reach the communications array. It's time every Selenari saw what their precious genetic purity has cost them, and what they stand to gain by letting go of it. As the facility's defenses engaged and evacuation protocols began, Naira felt her child pulse again with those new, impossible patterns. In that moment, she understood what the first matrons had known so long ago. True perfection wasn't about eliminating weakness, but about having the strength to embrace change. The war for her species' future had begun, and its first warrior would be born with both human eyes and Selenari stars in its blood. The Europa facility's medical bay had become a fortress and a sanctuary. As War Speaker Mira's fleet maintained their blockade outside, inside, something unprecedented was about to occur. Naira lay on the medical bed, her markings pulsing with colors no Selenari have displayed in generations, the ancient patterns of natural childbirth. The baby's bio readings are off the charts, Rena announced, her eyes fixed on the swirling holographic displays. The genetic integration it's perfecting itself as we watch. Harrison hadn't left Naira's side for hours, his presence somehow stabilizing the unprecedented biological processes occurring. Every cell is a fusion of both species, but better than either. The hybrid vigor is extraordinary. Outside, the facility's shields flared as another bombardment began. War Speaker Mira's voice boomed through all communication channels. This abomination cannot be allowed to survive. The purity of our species must be preserved. But her words rang hollow as reports continued to flood in from across selenary space. More pregnancies, more changes, more warriors choosing evolution over extinction. The barrier of fear was breaking. Naira's markings suddenly flared brilliant white, a color never before seen in their species. The child was coming. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace. Tress called from her security station. It's the research colonies. All of them. The screens filled with images of selenary science vessels, their crews largely comprised of those who had been deemed imperfect by traditional warrior standards. Ships full of the very genetic diversity the Empire had tried to engineer away. High Matron Vess's voice carried new strength as she addressed the fleet. War Speaker Mira, your forces are now outnumbered. The scientists, the researchers, the very ones you called flawed, they've all made their choice. Stand down. Never. Mira's response crackled with rage. Better extinction than degradation. A new voice cut through the chaos. Dr. Harrison, broadcasting on all frequencies. Look at your scanners. War Speaker. Really look. The child about to be born. Its genetic structure is more perfect than anything your engineering ever achieved. Not through manipulation, but through the very natural processes you feared. The medical bay sensors erupted with activity as Naira's body began the final stages of labor. Her markings synchronized with the child's, creating patterns of light that pulsed through the entire facility. Every selenary who saw it felt something stir in their modified genes, a recognition of something lost long ago. Impossible, Mira whispered, her voice carrying through the still-open channel. No, Naira managed through waves of sensation entirely new to her species. Inevitable. We engineered ourselves into a corner, but evolution just found another path. Through humanity, we can be whole again. The child emerged into the world with a burst of light that temporarily overloaded the facility's sensors. When the systems recovered, everyone stared in awe. The infant's skin held both the crystalline qualities of the selenary and the warm tones of humanity. Its eyes, when they opened, showed pupils that shifted like starlight. Most remarkably, its bioluminescent patterns played across its skin in completely new configurations, expressing emotions and abilities neither species had possessed alone. Life finds a way, Harrison whispered, watching as Naira cradled their child. Not backward to what was, but forward to what could be. The medical bay's screen showed War Speaker Mira's fleet powering down their weapons. On every selenary ship watching the broadcast, warriors were making their choice. The rigid genetic hierarchy that had defined their society for generations was crumbling in the face of undeniable truth. Your names, High Matron Vess prompted softly, performing the ancient naming ritual that hadn't been needed since natural births ended. Naira looked at Harrison, then back at their child, whose patterns now played in gentle waves of gold and blue. Nova, she said finally, because she represents a new star rising, a new beginning. As if in response, Nova's markings shifted to create patterns that spelled out recognizable DNA sequences, human and selenary genetic code intertwining in real time on her skin. She wasn't just a hybrid. She was a bridge between species, showing the path to a future neither had imagined possible. Through the facility's windows, the gathered fleets hung in space like a field of stars. The weapons had fallen silent. The choice between evolution and extinction had been made not through force, but through the undeniable power of new life finding its way. Transmit the medical data to every selenary world, Naira ordered, her voice tired but triumphant. Let them all see what becomes possible when we stop fighting our own evolution. As Nova's patterns continued to create new configurations of light and meaning, the assembled scientists began documenting everything. This was more than just the birth of a child. It was the birth of a new chapter in both species' history. The war to preserve genetic purity was over. The journey to discover what both species could become together was just beginning. 5 years after Nova's birth, the great crystal spires of New Genesis Colony sparkled under the light of Europa's ice-reflected sun. The settlement had grown from a military facility into a thriving metropolis where humans and Selenari lived, worked, and evolved together. In the central research tower, Naira watched her daughter demonstrate abilities that still amazed both species. Nova stood in the observation chamber, her hybrid skin shimmering with complex patterns that translated genetic codes into visible light. Around her, a group of children, both pure human and Selenari, as well as other hybrids, watched in fascination as she decoded a complex protein sequence through bioluminescent display. "She's teaching them something we never imagined possible," Dr. Reena Patil observed, recording the interaction. "The ability to read and display genetic information in real time. It's revolutionizing our understanding of biology." Harrison stepped into the room, now wearing the formal robes of the Joint Species Council. "The latest reports from the outer colonies are here. The fertility crisis is officially over. Natural births have surpassed engineered ones across all Selenari worlds." Naira's markings rippled with satisfaction, displaying the mature maternal patterns that had become common among her kind. And war speaker Mira, leading the terraforming initiative on New Haven, Harrison replied with a slight smile. "She says if we're going to evolve, we might as well create new worlds to evolve into." The transformation of Selenari society had been profound. The rigid warrior hierarchy had given way to a more diverse culture where strength was measured not by genetic purity, but by the ability to adapt and grow. The very traits they had once engineered away, creativity, emotional depth, biological flexibility, had become their greatest assets. "High Matron Vess is ready for the ceremony," Tress announced, entering the chamber. Her own markings now displayed the subtle patterns of early pregnancy, no longer something to hide but to celebrate. The ceremony. Naira felt a flutter of emotion she would have once suppressed. Today, they would officially recognize the new species that was emerging. Not quite human, not quite Selenari, but something more than either. In the great assembly hall, thousands gathered while millions more watched via holographic projection across both human and Selenari space. Nova stood with other hybrid children, their bioluminescent patterns creating a stunning display of synchronized light and color. High Matron Vess, her ancient frame supported by both traditional crystal staff and modern medical technology, addressed the gathering. 5 years ago, we stood at the edge of extinction, trapped by our own pursuit of perfection. Today, we witness the next step in both our species' evolution, not through engineering or control, but through the wisdom to let life find its own path. The hybrid children began to demonstrate their unique abilities. Some could process complex genetic codes through their bioluminescence. Others showed unprecedented regenerative capabilities or cognitive developments that merged the best of both species. Each was unique, yet all represented a future neither species could have achieved alone. "The first matrons," Vess continued, "left us a key to our salvation, hidden in our very genes. But they knew something we have forgotten. That true strength lies not in refusing to change, but in having the courage to become something new." Nova stepped forward, her patterns shifting to display the newly decoded genetic sequences that proved what scientists had long suspected. The first matrons hadn't just preserved compatible genes by accident. They had encountered evidence of humanity's potential long ago and engineered their entire species to be ready for this moment. "We thought we were letting go of perfection," Naira addressed the gathering, standing proudly beside Harrison. "Instead, we were embracing it in its truest form. The perfect ability to adapt, to grow, to become more than we were." The assembly hall's crystal walls reflected the patterns from the hybrid children, creating a dance of light that symbolized the interweaving of two species' destinies. In the audience, former warriors sat beside scientists, their own bodies displaying the changes that had swept through selenary society. The rigid divisions of the past had melted away in the face of undeniable evolution. "What do you see?" Harrison asked Nova later, as they watched the double sunset from the colony's observation deck. Their daughter's patterns shifted to show swirling DNA helixes merging and transforming. "I see tomorrow," she replied, her voice carrying harmonics that merged human speech with selenary bioluminescent communication. "And it's beautiful." Naira watched her family, her human mate, her hybrid daughter, the impossible future they represented, and felt her markings pulse with colors that would have been forbidden in the old empire. They had thought they were saving their species, but in truth, they were transcending it. Evolution hadn't just restored what was lost, it had opened the door to something entirely new. As night fell over New Genesis Colony, the lights of the hybrid children painted possible futures across the crystal spires. They were the bridge between stars and soil, between engineering and nature, between what was and what could be. They were tomorrow's children, and their story was just beginning.